Okay, seems to be working. So why don't we get started and say our blessing so that we can immerse ourselves in Torah. Yada-dai-dai-dai-dai-dai. 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 Yada-dai-dai-dai-dai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu לעסוק בדברי תורה, לעסוק בדברי תורה, הפוק בה, לעסוק בדברי תורה, ידעי, ידעי, Okay, so we are going to be diving in to this week's Torah portion, which is in Leviticus. We're nearing the end of Leviticus already. It's such a quick book. I know that we might have a love-hate relationship with the animal sacrifice therein, but I do think that even though it can be hard to relate to this idea of animal sacrifice, there actually are some really valuable lessons that we can get out of this in modern times. And so today I took out just a few verses that will be our focal point, which come from Leviticus 22. Would anyone like to read these in the English?
I will.
Thank you, Jessica.
The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, when an ox or a sheep or a goat is born, it shall stay 7 days with its mother, and from the 8th day on it shall be acceptable as an offering by fire to the Lord. However, no animal from the herd or from the flock shall be slaughtered on the same day with its young. When you sacrifice a thanksgiving offering to the Lord, sacrifice it so that it may be acceptable in your favor.
Okay, so we can kind of just think about this for a little while. And I know you saw the sheet and saw some of the things in it, but why do you think this is so important that the Torah makes a point of saying that for 7 days, a baby must be with its mother before it's eligible, before it could possibly be sacrificed? Yeah, go ahead, Jessica.
Well, my first thought is that would be for the sake of the mother, because a mother bears a mammal. She's going to be filled with milk, and the baby will be nursing. And from personal experience, it's uncomfortable to be, not to have someone nursing there when you're ready for that. So I would think that it was for the mother's sake. That's my first
Compassion
thought.
for the mother. Beautiful.
Yes.
Except that it's 7 days is not enough. Sorry.
Well, maybe it is for a goat or a sheep or
No, a goat or a sheep, they're sentient beings. They have feelings. If you take a 7-year-old baby away from its mother, it will cry. I mean, just because you haven't been around animals and don't know that, it still doesn't even make sense. You take a baby away from its mother, that animal is going to have feelings about it. So I don't understand this at all, the 7 day. It's just very arbitrary to me. Sorry.
Okay, no, thank you so much, Judy. Any other thoughts here?
Well, 7 days is one of those biblical numbers. What's after 7, 40 days? It could stay with its mother for 40 days and then you can sacrifice it.
But why is 7 an important number?
From creation,
Yeah,
From
so
the 7 visible objects in the sky, from where we got our days, 7 days of the week from the Babylonians or the
mhm.
Sumerians or one of those Ians.
Right, relating to the story of creation. And of course, we have the 8th day here also. That on the 8th day, an animal could be acceptable.
Day of Brit Milah.
Right. So relating to circumcision in some way, right?
I
So,
guess that, oh, all right, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
go ahead, Michael. I'm
I
sorry.
don't know. I just guess they didn't believe at that time, or maybe they did, and I don't understand it, that the spirit and essence of God is in all living things. And so if, as Judy said, a sentient being, that I don't understand why it was acceptable to sacrifice any living thing. It just, I can't relate to that in the 21st century and what they did, thousands of years ago. Just,
That's the key, 21st century. You have to
no,
try.
I get it. I mean, I just don't know why it was important to them then, why to kill something that was alive, whether you wait 7 days or 7 years. I don't know.
Yeah, well, one thing I would say is that just from a historical standpoint, this was formulated in the age where we were kind of moving from hunter-gatherer to agricultural society, and in the hunter-gatherer stage, it was all about animals were food, and that was the way you survived, and it was a very important animal sacrifice point at that point. I don't know. I would never have thought about what Jessica mentioned. It didn't come to my mind at all. But yeah, I thought that was interesting.
But if you're an agrarian society like these people were, then having animals was a sign of wealth. So if you're willing to sacrifice an animal, or basically giving what we might say today, giving a large donation to your favorite charity, hopefully Temple Bethel, for instance, that was the appropriate thing to do. That was their form of wealth.
Yeah, well,
One
times
other
have
quick
changed.
contextual thing here is most sacrifices that were offered were not just burned on the altar. Most sacrifices actually were used as food. It was the only way that the priest, for example, could eat, because the priests were so
Right, yeah.
concerned with
no
taking
fire.
care of people who are sick, with doing all of their priestly duties. They couldn't, have animals that they were taking care of. They couldn't be, creating crops in a farm or anything like that. So they ate through the sacrifices that were brought. And also people who brought sacrifices, it was how they ate food as well.
The other question I was going to ask is, what was the purpose of the sacrifice at that point? And, if part of it, what was the importance to God? And if part of it is to provide food, maybe there's some health benefit or reason why you wouldn't want to eat a fetal or newborn, or there's some benefit to wait, 7 days, or some reason to do that.
Yeah, I was going to say that too, that maybe they wait 7 days to see that it's a viable animal and that it's not diseased, that would be a health benefit. Maybe experience taught them to wait at least that, to see if it's unblemished or, worthy of being sacrificed.
Do you know the answer to this question, Rabbi?
We're going to go through text to talk through that, right?
Okay.
But the beauty of our tradition is that you can have multiple different answers. And so the fact that we've come up with so many different possibilities here, it speaks to the importance of Torah study, the importance of kind of delving in. And it's okay if we come out of this with all different answers. It's okay if we come out of this and say, I'm not cool with this whole thing altogether, right?
Okay.
or if we, there might be pieces in here where, even though I don't think any of us taking part in Torah study today are advocating animal sacrifice to come back, right? This is something that has not been part of our tradition for 2,000 years, and I think we're in agreement that it should stay that way. But perhaps there are little pieces here that we might be able to get wisdom from. And so what I did is I created a text sheet based on 4 different answers, all of which have come up today. These are not the only 4 possible answers. Obviously, we've heard some really other, like, beautiful ones that won't fall in these categories, and that's okay. But I want to use them as a starting point to a deeper conversation. So, for example, one of the things that came up was this idea of circumcision, that the animal would be deemed viable and could be sacrificed on the 8th day of their life. So Ibn Ezra is the one who points out, like a child that is circumcised, that is, until a quarter of the month has passed. So you couldn't do it before then, because there is this connection to circumcision somehow with the 8th day of life of the animal. Now, that could be really, really confusing, because circumcision, of course, relates to Jewish males. And this, we're talking about a baby animal. Obviously, they're not the same thing. Maimonides, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So I know a little something about moon cycles and nature, and how on certain times of the month, you're going to have more blood flowing than others. And so maybe what they were trying to do is time it so that the animal didn't suffer as much. It's just a thought.
Yeah, so it could have something to do with the compassion piece again, which is one of the things that we're going to get to later. Thank you. So I want to take us to this text, and I didn't include a whole lot about circumcision in here, though we certainly could have a deeper conversation. But Maimonides writes, the circumcision must take place on the 8th day, because all living beings are after birth, with the first 7 days, very weak and exceedingly tender, as if they were still in the womb of their mother. Not until the 8th day can they be counted among those who enjoy the light of the world. This is also the case with beasts may be inferred from the words of Scripture. 7 days shall it be. I think that's supposed to be under the sun, and I was typing too quickly, as if it had no vitality before the end of that period. In the same manner, man is circumcised after the completion of 7 days. The period has been fixed and has not been left to everybody's judgment. So what do you make of this? Why is it important that Maimonides is pointing any of this out?
Well, I happen to know that in the Jewish religion, there's that thought that until you breathe your first breath, you're not really a living human being. So it's okay to abort a fetus. And maybe they're just stretching it out to the 8th day, that's still kind of, they're still in that fetal, they're still not fully aware or alive in a way. They're saying it's still like in the womb.
Right, it's a period of transition.
Uh-huh.
Anyone else have a thought on this?
The last sentence, I related to the period has been fixed and it's not been left to everybody's judgment. I sometimes think that decisions are made, and perhaps because of my own ignorance, they appear to me to be arbitrary. But the fact that there's a boundary or a limit seems to be what's important. Contemporarily, I don't know what makes a person eligible to vote at age 18 or 21, or to enlist in the service, or to start kindergarten, or whatever. We do make decisions so that there will be a limitation, because if we didn't, there would be lots of problems. So I'm pretty comfortable with Maimonides looking at at this in this way, and it feels right to me.
Yeah, a decision has to be made about something. And so the number itself might be arbitrary, but the idea of having a number isn't.
So I never thought about this particular question before, but I'm sitting here and saying this is sacrificial, killing animals as sacrifice, as part of a holy thing, as part of something you do in the temple. But so does that mean that if you are killing an animal for your family's food or to trade with somebody else for something else, that it doesn't matter what day the newborn or newly hatched animal is killed or sold? I never thought about that before. I'm like, huh.
It's a really good question, right? Because it doesn't talk about that at all here. This is specifically with regard to sacrifice.
Mhm.
It certainly could have reverberations into everyday life, but you're right, it doesn't explicitly speak to that.
Did they sacrifice a male and female animals, or did it matter, or is it only
Yeah.
male? Do you know?
No, it doesn't explicitly say that here. In other places, it does say male and female, but I can't speak to this particular sacrifice.
All right.
Sometimes it specifies a male animal in a different situation. I always think it's because, the female animal is the one that really reproduces the species. One male animal can service many, many females. It's not the other way around. But in this, the text we're reading here, it is a newborn animal.
Right.
Gender is not specific.
Exactly. I read it that way, but I was just curious in those times if they differentiated between one and the other, between males and females, or it didn't matter.
It's a really, really good question. I just don't have an answer for you.
No problem.
Just a thought that occurs to me. I didn't mean to cut you off, Michael.
No, you didn't. That's fine.
Oh, okay. Just a thought that occurs to me is that considering just Judaism is one thing, but in contrast to other ancient civilizations, it might have been considered much more humane to sacrifice an animal than a child or than an adult human being. And other civilizations sacrificed people.
Right. The Canaanites.
Right. And that is specifically and more than once said, you don't do that.
Is there a reason why they sacrificed the babies? Is there a reason versus a fully grown animal?
Well, this isn't necessarily saying that it's preferable to sacrifice a baby. It's more setting the limits that it's not acceptable to sacrifice a baby in their first week of life.
Yeah.
There was something I wanted to go back to, and now I'm drawing a blank, and that's okay. I'm sure it will come up someplace else. But it's really kind of interesting that there's a relation to circumcision. Oh, this is what it was. So people ask about the 8th day of life, specifically with a like male baby, right? Because that's when the circumcision would typically be. Like, is that person a Jew before then? And the answer, of course, is yes, absolutely. The baby is born a Jew. So then why is it that the circumcision is on the 8th day of life and not the 1st day of life? And it relates to what Maimonides is talking about here. At least one of the ideas of it does, that the very first week of life, a baby is so fragile. Right. And also, we don't know the vitality of the baby. And that first week is when they're most vulnerable. So the idea of having a circumcision on the 8th day, it's okay, they've made it this week. We can have this celebration kind of a thing. And we can see that kind of teaching playing out in Maimonides' words right here in Guide for the Perplexed. Are you ready to move on to the next idea? They're all interrelated.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so the next idea relates to this idea of creation. That an animal isn't killed in its first 7 days because there's 7 days of creation. And this way, this animal is alive for those 7 days. Now, Torah wrote this commentary saying, an ox or a goat that will be born, it's just quoting from this part of the Torah, after the Torah has given us a list of animals unwelcome on the altar due to all kind of blemishes, that piece takes place right before this section that I brought to you today. And now adds a new type of disqualification, being underage, less than 7 days old. Even though these animals do not display any blemish, being too young or too old can also disqualify an animal from potential sacrifice. Some commentators claim that the reason is that if one were to sacrifice an animal on the very day it was born, some onlookers might construe this as an homage to that day. The first day, heaven and earth existed. Similarly, offering such a young animal on any other of the 7 days of the week on earth might be misinterpreted as some form of idolatry. Hence, after a whole week has elapsed, such misinterpretation of the owner's intention is impossible. By waiting at least 7 days before offering a newly born animal as sacrifice, this amounts to an acknowledgement that God created the universe in 6 days and that God rested on the 7th day. So what do you make of this? You're laughing, Steve. I'm curious.
No, I'm always intrigued with the mental gymnastics they go through sometimes to to establish a point. It sounds reasonable to me. I mean, again, when you're so, it's hard for us to think of how the way they thought 2,000 years ago. So.
But like, why is there mental gymnastics going on here? Like, what exactly is the point that's so important for him to make here?
I think it goes back to like what Jim had said earlier. The people around that they were living amongst would have interpreted it that way. That is, if we're sacrificed on a given day, then that day would become holy, or perhaps that's the way they thought then. We have a difficult time grasping that, but
I'm wondering if it has to do with instilling or understanding the notion of holiness. If these things are addressed, the notion of time and trying to make these comparisons or understandings to creation, etc., just the process of thinking about it, maybe it's a notion of looking at how to make this act holy. Is that maybe out of left field? I don't know.
One thing I was just going to say in the historical context, I think at that time it was what, animal sacrifice was widely practiced, and in the Torah you're kind of changing it and bringing it only to the temple, and all these procedures, so I don't know, maybe that has something to do with that.
Yeah, how widespread it is. And Marla, I don't think it's out of left field at all what you said. Ultimately, what the entire book of Leviticus is getting to is, how do we make holy decisions? And so this is the way that Torah is trying to make sense of that. And there's many ways that we can try to make sense of that here.
And those questions came to the priests, and then after the destruction of the second temple, they came to the rabbis, to interpret why, just like we're sitting there saying, what? Why are we doing this? People have been doing that forever. And those are also the people who are most likely to know how to read and write. that was not at all universal. So there, in a way, this is passing on exactly what you're talking about, Marla, which is this: how do we make sense out of this? How do we make this holy? How do we not look just like those people over there who are sacrificing whatever and whomever they are sacrificing?
Mhm.
A really good question. It's a really interesting way to look at this one, especially.
It's giving them guidelines by which to live
Mm-hmm.
and defining it for them, and I think religion does make a lot of things simpler.
Mm-hmm.
This,
And it's so, that's what I'm thinking as well.
Yeah.
is this one of those things that is animal sacrifice one of those things we borrowed from earlier societies, earlier civilizations?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think we ought to bury it where it belongs. One other quick question. I've been in my studies, I read somewhere where part of the sacrifice was eaten and part of it was not eaten and had to do with one thing or another. Do you have an answer for that, Rabbi?
Yeah, it depends on the sacrifice,
Okay.
right? That there's one, we had spoken about this a little bit a few weeks back, that there's one sacrifice called the Ola Offering. That is the only sacrifice that is fully burnt on the altar. All of the other ones are consumed.
Okay, thank you.
We have a barbecue.
So it's not interfering with the creation story and what they believed, as we've said. That's why we're waiting in the full week, the seventh day, just to not interfere with what they believed. Right. Anyway.
Yeah, and there's one more addition to that, Michael, that comes up in Midrash Tanchuma. Would anyone like to read this text?
I'll read it.
Thank you.
Okay.
The R just means rabbi.
Yeah, Rabbi Joshua of Siknin said in the name of Rabbi Levi, the situation is similar to a king who entered a province where he issued a proclamation and said, "Let no strangers who are here see my face before they first see the face of my matron." Similarly, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Israel, "My children shall not approach me with an offering until the Sabbath queen has passed over it. For there are no 7 days without a Sabbath, and there is no circumcision without the passing of a Sabbath." Rabbi Isaac said, "An ordinance for humanity and an ordinance for beasts are on a par. An ordinance for humanity is, and on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. And an ordinance for beast is, and from the 8th day on, it shall be acceptable for an offering by fire to the Lord."
Okay, so
Yeah.
does anyone feel like they understand this text and can say a little bit about what's going on here?
No.
It is confusing. I can clarify it a little bit.
The rules having to do with animal care and sacrifice are equal in importance to the specific rules on how we are to conduct our lives.
Yeah, so there's this connection between animals and human beings. Exactly, Steve. This piece about the matron, right? This piece here where it says, "Let no strangers who are here see my face before they first see the face of my matron." This is basically saying the animal needs some time to see the face of its mother.
Yeah.
To spend some time with the mom. That's the connection that's going on here. So it's not going to be in the first 7 days because they need some time together. And then this piece relating the animal's mother to Shabbat, because as we know, Shabbat is called like a queen. It's like the Shekhinah, the feminine presence of God is with us on Shabbat. That's the Shabbat queen. And so you can't you can't end an animal's life. You can't even have a circumcision before you can actually live through a Shabbat and can have some time with that feminine presence of the Shabbat queen.
Really a beautiful concept. And you think about when the boy is circumcised, there is a kind of another level of holiness and a recognition and a drawing closer, you know. And so we're also saying that birds or animals also are holy and are worthy of that holiness, a piece of holiness, a piece of recognition that the 7 days are important to all living things, as it were. Certainly here, both animals and birds. We're not talking about fish here.
Right. That's true. And this text actually does go on and it further clarifies that, but I thought this piece of the text kind of makes the point on its own.
And as we talk about animals, I live in the city, but I have 3 deer in my yard. Just run through.
That's pretty cool. That happened just now?
Yeah, there's a pathway through this neighborhood, I guess, and they just went tromping through. Sets off my motion cameras.
Very cool. Any other thoughts on this one?
Well, I think the emphasis on the Shabbat is significant.
What about it?
Well, it's just you just can't get by a week without it, and you have to have it in your mind. Whatever you're planning for whatever week, you're always planning. You know, just I know Orthodox families, you know, that was constantly on their mind. If you're away from home, they had to be home. There's no two ways about it. You had to be there, and so it's planned. It's the big thing of the week, and very important. So tying it to sacrifice, I don't quite understand it, but I think it has a lot of significance.
Yeah, it's basically saying that Shabbat is so important that not even an animal should have to go without it. Not even an animal that will be killed early in life in order to be a sacrifice should be deprived of the beauty of Shabbat.
Well, when we look at God created all living things, you know, the very beginning of Genesis. I'm having fun thinking about this today. It's like, why would we do this? Why is it so important that we look at this and say, wait a minute, we were the last in the list of created things that have birth and death, including plants and other things. And I think it's a reminder of that. It's kind of an interesting thing to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Are we just an afterthought right at the end, or? But really, we're special because they gave us dominion over the rest of these creatures.
Well, yeah, some people translate that as they give us responsibility for them.
Right. I agree.
I think I heard. Oh, I'm sorry, but I also heard that it could be translated dominion with the animals.
There's another way to look at it, yeah.
And those are all really beautiful like interpretations and ways to understand the relationship that we have with other living things. And we're going to get into some more of that in just a bit. But before we do, I wanted to bring in another kind of a perspective here that I found to be pretty fascinating. So just starting with Bakor Shor, and this section I entitled The Necessity of Time. Of course, all of these are interrelated, right? But Bakor Shor says, it shall stay 7 days with its mother. That's the quote from the verse in Torah. In case the animal is non-viable, we had mentioned that before, right? And further, everything which separates from a place of impurity and a place of stench needs separation before it enters into the camp of God's presence. Okay, so there's this idea of an animal that is sacrificed needs to be holy, right? It's through it, people are connecting to God. People are offering, in this case, Thanksgiving offerings, offerings of gratitude to God for everything that they have. So there needs to be a preparation in order to be able to be used for this holy purpose. Now, there's an interesting kind of connection to this that Rabbi Yitzchak Rama makes in Akedat Yitzchak in his compilation of commentary. And I want to bring this to you. It is a little bit longer of a text, but I promise it's worth it. Would anyone like to just read the first paragraph or so?
I'll read if you want.
Thanks, Steve.
And you shall abide at the door of the tent of meeting day and night for 7 days, and keep the charge of the Lord. God, in his superior wisdom, commanded Aaron and his sons, on entering their holy service, to observe an inaugural period of 7 days in which to contemplate and gain comprehension on the holy charge of the Eternal. During these 7 days, they were not allowed to leave the sanctuary, but were to spend them in the house of the Lord. Their stay there was to stimulate them to ponder on the divine work of creation and realize God's power and window. Such meditation leads man to love and serve his Creator.
Okay, so just kind of a starting point here. Obviously, this is referring to Aaron as a priest getting ready to take on a sacred responsibility, right? Aaron and his sons. And then we continue on a little bit. Would anyone like to pick this up?
You want me to continue?
Yeah, continue with one more paragraph. Thanks, Steve.
I'll put my Fritos back. This is the purpose of the 7-day period of seclusion, which should aid a sensitive person to become fully conscious of his task, just as the priests were enjoined to do upon their consecration, in order to bring home to them their holy task of serving God, the Creator of all things, omnipotent and omniscient, and their obligations to divest themselves of their everyday garments, replacing them by the holy vestments in which to carry out their sacred tasks in the sanctuary in a clean and pure state.
Okay, so why is the 7-day period so important to the priests? Like, what do you make of this text so far?
They were stuck in the sanctuary for 7 days. Certainly, by the end of the 6th or the 7th day, they know why they're there, and they will certainly not wonder. I mean, they will recognize the purpose of how important it is in the worship and the belief in God, and the importance of waiting of the 7 days as with the creation of the world. Anyway.
On a very small scale, this might be a bit of a stretch, but I know that when we are able to go to our holy building, our sanctuary, which we have not been able to do for a year now, I feel when I walk into that building to pray, I get a more personal relationship to God than I do sitting in front of my screen here for our Zoom services. I know that's the best we can do in this situation. And we're only there for an hour and a half or two. These guys are here for 7 days. That same feeling is amplified by a major factor.
I think also when you have a major change, I mean, in your life, in this case, they're going to pick up what Moses originally thought he was going to do and be in charge of us in Exodus. I mean, we haven't reached the Holy Land yet. That is it's like being able to go on a retreat right away to contemplate what you have been, who you are now, and how you see your responsibilities to form a team. We have to remember also that Nadav and Avihu have just been gone like that. But I'm thinking of like when people get married, they go on a honeymoon. I mean, that's a major change in your life, a major change when you change jobs or you change cities or you change schools, when you make major life-changing things. Like when I was ordained, it was like I knew that people would think the minute somebody said Rabbi Catherine, that all of a sudden I knew a whole lot of stuff that I didn't really know. That I hadn't done yet or tried yet. And that change of responsibility or change of title or the end of one phase and the beginning of another. I mean, this is a beautiful idea that it would be when someone dies, and you take that time to mourn, that we respect. Again, this is that 7 days, the beginning of the world, the whole thing coming back in again, that we would give everything, including ourselves, that type of respect and that time to contemplate.
Yeah, and how often do we actually give ourselves that chance, right? Yeah. To have a whole week, what a gift that is, to be able to just refocus and to think about what is so important. In some ways, Passover is supposed to actually serve that purpose, right? It's a week long where we're changing the way we're doing things, but it's not exactly this. Mm-hmm. So I want us just to continue with the very last part of this text. This approach is of the utmost importance for any sensitive person who aspires to perfection. An excellent example is the commandment, "It shall remain 7 days with its mother, and from the 8th day and thenceforth it shall be acceptable." Just as an animal is not fit for the altar, let's go down. Okay, is not fit for the altar before the special 7-day period has passed and its vitality has been proved, so should any discerning person allow himself 7 days of preparation before embarking upon his enterprise. So it's kind of putting this whole idea of the sacrifice of the animal in an entire different light, right? This is the enterprise of the animal, which is kind of interesting and might not necessarily be something we agree with, but it certainly is a different perspective, isn't it? So far we've looked at 3 different ways in which the 7-day period or this 8-day period really is significant. One is its connection to circumcision. Another is a connection to creation and even Shabbat. And this third one has been just the importance of taking time to prepare oneself for what is coming next. And I think that can be something that we can kind of sit with as we're preparing for what will be a little bit of a different reality, right? After all of this, as we're slowly coming back and as the levels from COVID are going down and we're preparing to enter the yellow tier, we are moving to next stages. And so the importance of having that time to figure out what this transition looks like for us is really, really important. But the last one that I want to bring in, and something that's come up in your commentaries a number of times already, is this idea of compassion that's going on here. And I know, Judy, this might not go far enough, and I appreciate that, but I'm going to bring it in anyway. So here's another piece from Maimonides. Would anyone like to read this? No one wants to read today, Steve.
I'll read if you want to read.
That'd be great. Thank you.
The commandment concerning the killing of animals is necessary because the natural food of man consists of vegetables and of the flesh of animals. That's true. It is not allowed to torment the animals by cutting the throat in a clumsy manner. by pole axing or by cutting off a rib while the animal is alive. It is also prohibited to kill an animal with its young on the same day, in order that people should be restrained and prevented from killing the two together in such a manner that the young is slain in sight of the mother. For the pain of the animal under such circumstances is very great. There is no difference in this case between the pain of man and the pain of other living things, since the love and tenderness of the mother of her young ones is not produced by reasoning, but by imagination. And this faculty exists not only in man, but in most living beings. Interesting. That this all reflects back on the rules for kashrut, for killing an animal, which is what my ancestors did. They were all shochets.
Oh, interesting.
My grandfather was a shochet in Pennsylvania, and his father before him, and so on and so forth.
So, yeah. So, I mean, any commentaries or thoughts on this? This seems similar to what you were saying before, Judy, at least a piece of this.
I think it's showing a lot of compassion and, just understanding and giving people time to be thoughtful about what they're doing, and I think therefore it makes things more meaningful when you take the time to think about it. And but showing compassion, I mean, this is what I'm getting above all.
Yeah, I would just say again, in the context of the times, the most pagan rituals would, sacrifices in all kinds of ways and all over the place. And these are maybe looked at the time as, kind of reforming that and putting rules and trying to be healthier and more compassionate in doing that. Right. Just like there's slavery mentioned at that time, it's a different perspective than we have today, what's acceptable.
Yeah. The hope is that we keep evolving. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
When Josie and I were first married, I was at that time still rather familiar with how a shochet would kill an animal. And the whole concept being that the animal should experience as little pain as possible. Again, these rules were established long before we had guns. So you had to have an extremely sharp knife. It had to be very long so that the shochet could make a single cut of the throat and kill the animal as quickly as possible. This I knew on an academic level, but it wasn't until we went to Hawaii for our honeymoon, and we happened to go to a place where they were killing pigs. The way they killed pigs, believe me, those animals suffered. I won't go into the details of it because it would not be pleasant, but I didn't completely appreciate how important that was till I saw how the island people killed the pigs. Very, very different.
What's standing out to me is that beyond the approach, the proper approach of animal sacrifice, in the last sentence, it says it is not produced by reasoning, but by imagination. And then I'm thinking that the whole concept of religion is through our faith is one that is not that we're thinking about it, but we accept it. We choose through our choice and our faith to abide by our religion rather than analyzing and thinking and about what whether this is appropriate or not and so on. I don't know. I'm trying to,
Yeah, that's absolutely
our
true.
emotions and our faith.
Right. There's something that is just, it's just ingrained in us as living beings.
Yeah.
So Nachmanides, sometimes in our commentaries, we have a conversation between commentators. And that's what takes place here, where Nachmanides actually responds to Maimonides. So this is Ramban responding to Rambam in the commentaries. And he brings in another verse in the Torah, which is this one that'll come in a little while from now. If along the road you chance upon a bird's nest in any tree or on the ground with fledgling or eggs, and the mother sitting over the fledglings or the eggs, do not take the mother along with her young. So we can see that there's some similarities here because it's relating to how we treat animals with regard to us being able to consume food. And Nachmanides responds saying, Maimonides in the guide says the point is that the mother should not have to watch her offspring being killed, since animals have as strong feelings about that as humans do. A mother's love and nurturing of her children do not come from the intellect, but from the imaginative facility or faculty, which animals and people alike have. If this were correct, the main point of Leviticus 22:28, which is the verse that we've been talking about this whole time, would be to prohibit slaughtering in the young first, and the prohibition of the mother would just be a precaution. But it is more correct to say that we are being instructed not to inure ourselves to cruelty. These decrees are for our benefit. It is not that the Holy One takes pity on the nest or on the mother animal and her young. He does not prevent us from doing what we need to do to them. The point is to teach us to be merciful and to prevent us from being cruel. For cruelty spreads easily through the human soul.
Oh boy, isn't that true? Isn't there numerous studies showing that people who are murderers or torturers of humans started out with animals?
Mm-hmm.
We can say amen to this.
Yes, indeed.
So say more about why this resonates so much.
Just turn on the TV. Terrible.
Well, they're talking about a mother's love and being, instinctive. And, how important it is, and respecting that. And, following these guidelines, which will help them not be cruel and do things in a manner that would show compassion.
Yeah, so Maimonides is saying the reason that we don't kill in the first 7 days is because there is a concern that God has for the animals. What Nachmanides says is no, we can kill the animals. The reason we have these rules is because God cares about us being merciful beings.
It seems to me that what comes to mind immediately, based on the comments that have just been made, think about the cruelty of a person like the policeman who killed George Floyd. He's acting in an extremely cruel manner, and it's unlikely that he is not familiar with the pain that he's inflicting. And why does he act that way? That's the kind of thing I think this is an admonition to try and prevent.
We have a lot to learn there, right? Because cruelty spreads easily through the human soul, right? We can see that. We can see instances of that. So how important it is that we have rules within our tradition which teach us to take some time, which teach us to consider the animal, just even recognizing, oh, this animal is on its 4th day of life. It's too soon. The animal deserves to live more. Just taking that little bit of time, how important that truly is. I just want to bring in this last text really quickly, just because I'm noticing the time, and then I'm going to stop sharing the screen. So even Cassi said, summing up, we learn that God has, through this principle, acquainted us with a great part of existential wisdom, and at the same time taught us the quality of modesty and humbleness, so that we may always bear in mind that we are not very unlike a donkey or a mule, a cabbage or a pomegranate, or even an inert rock. But he has also instilled in us the quality of compassion to be shown to deserving people. For this was the main reason for the creation of the world. The quality of compassion, the main reason for the creation of the world. Any final thoughts on this piece?
Wow. Every year this is a challenge, huh?
Well, you know, it's so interesting, right? Because whenever I'm going through Leviticus, I always start by saying, oh, Leviticus again, I'm done with sacrifices. And then there is just nuggets of wisdom and beauty that come forth through our commentators. And I think that's exactly what this is, right? We can learn from this portion the ways in which Shabbat is so important, this holy week, this 8th day are important. We learn the importance of taking time so that we can really think about what our purpose as human beings is. And finally, this really beautiful teaching about compassion and the rules that the Torah gives us in order to allow that compassion to grow so that we can live as moral human beings with values of which we're proud.
I was trying to think what my takeaway would be for today. And I think what you just said, those 3 words, taking the time, that seemed to happen throughout this particular part that we were learning. And so for me, what I want to take away from it is that I need to be more thoughtful, slow it down, and figure out the meaning. And if I'm confused, I know I'll be forgiven for being confused. It's okay, but I need to put the effort to be thoughtful.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It is. So I know there's so much more to kind of take in, right? To take the time to reflect on. But I would love to just end this study together here with some words of blessing. Marla, will you lead us, even if it's not from this exact piece, which I'm guessing it's not.
It's just a little bit before where we were learning more about the imperfections of the animals. So it was Leviticus 21, 22, having a defect, you still may eat of holy food. And so the blessing for us today is imperfection. May you acknowledge your imperfections in your own words and reveal to yourself who you really are. Offer up the defects, small failures, and habits that restrict and confine your spirit. May you find self-acceptance in the very limitations of being human, in your flaws, cracks, and wrinkles. Dream of perfect repair and wholeness and envision yourself as a Holy Spirit. May you reach a place of honest acceptance between what might be and what is. This is the way the world cleanses itself.
Beautiful.
Pretty cool.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you all so much for a wonderful Torah study, for all of your questions and comments.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.